Hey, welcome back to Metropole Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. So, just quickly, came back from Worlds as of last week. We took a week off of the YouTube thing. It's really good to be back. Had a great time at Worlds, met a lot of people. It was absolutely fantastic, but we're not specifically going to be talking about Worlds right now. In fact, we're going to be talking about something that's probably been a bit late that I haven't talked about just yet, and that's some of the stuff that happened last month in Netrunner. So, if you're new to Netrunner or if you haven't heard any of this stuff, last month was actually really exciting for Netrunner, and that's because there was a lot of announcements. And just to get up to speed, we're going to be running through all of them, and it starts here with System Refresh. So rotation is a thing in Netrunner that we've seen coming for a while. It was actually announced maybe a year, 2 years ago. The idea with rotation was that when the 8th cycle comes out, I believe it's the 8th cycle, the upcoming cycle that is now announced as a Katara cycle is to come out. The first 2 cycles of Netrunner, Genesis and Spin Cycle, these two, some of the oldest cards in the game, they were to rotate out. What that means is that these cards, I don't know if you're going to be able to get them in stores anymore, but more importantly at least, they would not be tournament legal. So the card pool of cards in Tournament Netrunner was going to shrink. And that's actually a really cool thing. As much as it might seem bad that some of the cards you have are now useless, and mind you, this talk about organized play, like it only refers to organized play. So if you want to play activist support, play it all you want. You're like at your kitchen tables, no one cares. But it might seem like a bad thing that you're losing cards, but this is actually something a lot of people are excited for. I think rotation's a really good thing for a card game. As weird as it sounds, it's actually really exciting to lose cards in any sort of like constructed card game, as much as it is in some ways to gain cards. I think if you have less options or you have fewer options, specifically if there's cards that you're very often playing and you lose them, it forces you to play other cards and it mixes up the meta, and that can actually be really interesting. Now, what's arguably more important, there's a problem right now with Netrunner, which is that there's a lot of cards. The rotation there was about like 7 cycles in Netrunner that were legal as of a month ago, and then all the deluxes and the core set and all that. And I understand it's actually pretty difficult as a new player to get in if you want to get all the card pool, which isn't necessary specifically, but a lot of people want all the card pool. So I think it's also cool that we lost 12 products, and it's kind of easier to jump on board. So that's something that was meant to happen when the newest data, the first data pack of the new cycle came out, but they actually announced that was going to happen sooner, and that actually took place on October 1st. So suddenly on October 1st, the card pool changed, and that's something that is actually pretty surprising. Now, 2 other things happened on top of that, and this is one of them. This is not exactly in the chronological order it came out, but the NEPD Most Wanted list was updated, and this got updated in a really cool way. We're going to do a video talking about this more specifically, but the idea is that the cards became restricted, similar to like how Game of Thrones did or used to do it from my understanding. And then there's actually some cards that are banned. Just flat out banned. So these cards have been removed, and this is again only from competitive play. So if you want to play Friends in High Places again on your kitchen table, go ahead and do it. It's just as if you're going for an organized event run by FFG, you're gonna have to follow these rules. You can find these PDFs online. Actually, really exciting stuff. Now, on top of it, a third thing happened, and this is probably the craziest thing, and the thing that I'm honestly might be the most excited about, and that's this. There's a revised core set. That's crazy. So the idea is that there's a new core set in Netrunner, and it's going to replace the original core set. It's not a reboot of the game, they're just printing a new core set. And the new core set actually doesn't contain any new cards. The idea with this core set, it actually contains cards from the original core set, and it contains some cards that came from these first 2 cycles that rotated out, that were not going to be tournament legal. And the people at FFG picked together about 240 so cards and put it in this new box of new and old things. And once this gets released, it will replace the old core set in terms of tournament play. In fact, it actually did that sooner. You can't buy this box yet. From what I understand, it's on the boat. That's right here. It's been on the boat since the beginning of October. So we're hoping that it'll show up sometime around the holiday season, maybe beginning of January, Q1, 2018. But because we know what's in the set, they've shown this is a list of things that's in this box, and because it's only made of cards that have been printed already, there's no changes, no erratas to cards, just cards that you own. A lot of people who own, in fact, if you do own the entirety of the card pool, you don't actually have to buy anything new, because this box just contains a bunch of things you already have. So why is that important? Well, because there's a lot of cards from the original core set that don't exist anymore. There's a whole bunch of cards that were in the core set. They're not in this new revised core set, which is now, by the way, the tournament legal core set, that are gone. In fact, Worlds, hey, this congrats to Wilfie, by the way, who came in first. The Worlds was played with this new core set, and that's super exciting. And kind of weird that we're playing with a product that doesn't exist, but we have the PDF what's in the box and it's tournament legal. It's kind of wild, but all in all, I'm super excited. Just gotta say, it's kind of an awkward time if you're new to Netrunner right now, whether or not you want to buy the original core sets or wait for the new ones to come out. Like, you're in a weird limbo space, I can admit to that. I still think buying an original core set's not the worst thing. A lot of those cards are legal, like they're still in the new core set, and it's still fun to play. Again, if you can just play on your, this is only for tournaments, right? Like, you can still enjoy Netrunner with the original core set, that's for sure. So if you want to try the game, go ahead and do that. And so that's what we're here today, is we want to talk about the revised core set. And we want to go through this thing. There's a lot of cards in it, 240 cards. It's actually the biggest box that we've ever done an unboxing for. And we're doing an unboxing of a product that doesn't exist yet, but technically we've been playing with it for a couple months. And I think that's really exciting. We're going to start with Anarch. We're going to go through all the orange runner cards. Timestamps in the description below. That's the preamble. We're going to launch into this. There's actually like a bunch of things we have to tackle on this thing. We have to talk about the new cards. We have to talk about the cards that are been removed. And we have to talk about the cards that stayed between core set and original core set. I hope I did a good job explaining it, excuse me. The idea is it's cards that already existed, been put into a new box, and replaces the original core set. It's tournament legal as of October 1st. Not out yet, but will be out soon. So I think a good place to actually start is with what's been removed, which is kind of a weird place, but we start here. There's been some radical changes. Firstly, the IDs in this box have been changed, and we lose Noise. Noise is actually card number 1 in Netrunner. That's the number 1 here. And he's an ability that's actually very different. There's no ability in the game like that. The idea is whenever you install a virus program, you gotta trash the top card of R&D. And I think Noise has actually been very limiting in sort of design, the Netrunner design, and that's because just existence of Noise really decides the value of a virus, regardless of what's actually printed on the text box of the virus. There's about, I don't know, like 20-something viruses in the game, and the idea with a Noise deck is if you have just enough cheap viruses, you can just spam them onto the table and hopefully mill a lot of cards off the top of R&D. And it's very hard for the corp to deal with that, just losing cards at random. Now you have to ice archives, but still, if you just make one run on archives, that can be it, and that's kind of an issue. When we're talking about the cards today, we're going to be talking about them as in if you just buy the core set and you're playing with other like revised core set folk, or also in the whole like large constructed meta. In terms of even the constructed meta, in terms of the like core set, revised core set meta, Noise will be an issue. If you mill agendas off the top of your deck, there are very few ways for them to go back into your deck. There's very few ways to save that. This is Jackson Howard, one of the arguably biggest cards that just rotated out. Spoilers, this card did not get saved by the revised core set. And this was a 3 of in almost every corp deck for the last, I don't know, like 4 years. And Jackson Howard lets you put agendas back into your deck that Noise milled, and he doesn't exist. So that might actually have made Noise really scary. We do have other options to do that, like preemptive action, what more people are playing nowadays without Jackson. But I think without Noise, I really like Noise, and it's kind of sad that we're losing that sort of like virus trashing thing, but it did encourage a kind of a sit back and mill sort of play style, and it's probably not the best for the game. I understand that's a pretty lofty claim, but I understand it does limit design at least. Like viruses, you can't print a lot of cheap viruses in the game, and we'll see what they do with that. They've shown a lot of new viruses in the upcoming cycle, the Katara cycle, that's by the way what it's called, so we'll see where that goes. One thing that's definitely worth pointing out, this whole idea that the corp trashes the top card of R&D, that's very Anarch, it's very destructive, and that's actually something we're seeing more and more with the new Anarch cards that have been printed for the last little while. You see this live and well with cards like Maw. Maw is actually a really big card when it comes to understanding what Anarchs are like in this post-rotation world, post-core set world. The idea that accesses, you're not going to be multi-accessing it so much, but every time you access, you trash something. Begot's another very good one. Very good example of this, where you're multi-accessing, you're not seeing multiple cards, but every time you do access, it's very valuable because you're trashing and destroying things. And even destroying things at random is very disruptive, whether or not those are agendas. So while we do lose Noise, we have other cards that kind of replace it, and at least these cards are a bit more interactive, and I think overall that'll be good, as much as I miss this Noise, and there's some very beautiful altars around. So the question is, what replaces Noise? Well, we have a new Anarch ID, and just like we said before, there's no new cards in this pack. We actually have Reina Roja stepping up to take Noise's spot. Interestingly enough, well, not all of, but a whole bunch of the cards in this revised core set actually have new art. like new drawings. So this Reina Roja, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pull it up, but there's actually a new Reina Roja, and she has a different image, just like Chaos Theory here looks different. And a new Reina Roja, she's holding a gun. She's a bit older. It's very interesting. So what's Reina do? She's been around for a while. Very simple. The res cost of the first piece of ice regged each turn is increased by 1. So you're going for an ability that's very sit back and maybe install some viruses and hope you can get lucky, to Reina, which actually wants to run every turn. Why do you want to run every turn? Because you want to force the corp to res at least 1 piece of ice every turn, so you get your abilities worth and you bleed them a bit of credits. When I teach Netrunner, I'm actually like a really big fan of abilities like this that say like the first time a turn when you do something interactive, something good happens for you. So I like teaching people with Gabriel Santiago or Los or Reina, just because it encourages people to run every turn. I think that's a really fun way to learn Netrunner quickly once you slam into some of the scarier ice, but also it's good because you're interacting with each other, and I think that's generally pretty fun. So Reina's ability, it just costs you money. It costs you slightly more money to res things. And that's actually really relevant in the core set meta. Maybe, I don't know more than noise, but there's a lot of the decks in the core set are relying on ice. These are decks that have like 16 to 18 pieces of ice in them. Generally, they're kind of glaciery builds. So you're going to be able to bleed the core maybe 10 credits out of Reina. And we've classically seen other abilities like that give you, you know, credits every turn. Engineering the future, mind you, spoilers, does not exist anymore. But if you're getting 10 free credits in the first 10 turns and Reina can make you lose 8 of them, that's pretty good. Sure, those abilities just cancel each other out, but if they didn't have an ability like ETF, which they won't anymore, it's pretty great. So what can you do with that? You can even make it even worse. You can play cards like Xanadu, increase the res costs even more. This becomes a real tax very quickly. There's also, like, ice destruction isn't so much of a thing in the core set. It's kind of rotated out, I guess, in some ways, or it's been removed, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But there's actually a lot of other ways that we can deal or get more advantage out of Reina. There's been like a really heavy push from FFG to make the blue, the criminal space, have to deal with derezzing. And Reina actually works really well with these derezzing sort of abilities. Sure, this is 3 influence, but if she can derez ice to the point where it's actually really expensive to re-res, that's pretty good for you. That can be relatively good. First piece of ice rezzed. Yeah, so this works pretty well. Also, Lamprey still exists. You can play Lamprey, lock aggressive Reina, keep their credits down, run HQ, make them bleed money, and that's really cool. Also, cards like En Passant are great, and this has Reina on it herself. The idea is that they can't res, they trash things. These are not in the core set, but this is sort of the things you can do with Reina. Reina's ability on her own, pretty great, even if you don't actually... It's like not bad, even if you don't include anything really goofy. Not goofy, but like specifically out of the way to capitalize on it. Sadly, we do have cards like when Reina came out, she came out alongside the Kaisa suite, which were chess pieces that interacted on pieces of ice. And I'll be honest, this is actually the reason, largely the reason I'm playing Netrunner, is I watched old Team Covenant videos and did unboxings, and I saw there was like chess ice or chess programs that were moving around like chess pieces, and I thought, wow, this game looks crazy cool. I gotta try it out. But these are gone too. That's kind of sad. So just so you understand why it is, Reina Roja is a chess master according to the lore. She was a chess pro. And will they reprint these cards, or Kaisa Ice, will they come back, or sorry, Kaisa programs, who knows? It'd be fun if they do, and they're a bit under the curve in terms of power, but I'd like to see them come back for sure. Now, one thing that's definitely worth noting is this number up here, which is her link, and link is generally dismissed by a lot of newer players. It doesn't seem that important. In some matchups, it probably doesn't matter at all, but she's actually the only runner in the core set now that has 1 link, and that's important for 2 reasons. Firstly, I guess making news is in the core set, so there's when you're playing within the core set, there's definitely at least 1 ID that's really caring about tracing, so you get some value there. But also, Underworld Contacts is in the new core set, and this card it's actually pretty impressive that this remained from rotation. It got saved in the revised core set, but if you begin your turn with at least 2 link, you gain a credit at beginning of your turn, and this is not a unique card. You can put 3 on the table, and that's really good. And if there's any runner in the core set that can quickly capitalize on this sort of very strong drip economy, it's actually Reina, because she has 1 link. So these work really well together. Yeah, that's Reina. She's pretty solid. The problem with Reina has classically been in the constructed field is that not every deck, there's been a lot of decks recently that don't run that much ice. Generally things that go wider are the sort of acid strategy, so it's hard to capitalize on Reina. There's also other good Anarchs, but she's definitely fine. And for the core set, she's interesting, she's fun, she teaches people to run once a turn, and I think that's really great. Now this is Deja Vu, and this is actually one of the biggest cards that it has been removed from the revised core set. So this card is no longer in the revised core set. And what's Deja Vu do? It's a recursion card. And either you pay 2 credits to recur 1 card from your heap, or 2 virus cards from your heap. So you get extra value if you're bringing back the viruses. Now, noise has rotated, so the days of bringing back 2 cash, installing them, milling 2 cards, making like plus 4 credits, even more if you sell it, are gone. Also, the days of bringing back 2 parasites for 2 credits so you can trash 2 pieces of ice are gone for multiple reasons. By the way, parasite is no longer in the core set, revised core set. I gotta keep saying that. But that's all nice and good. Now, recursion in card games has typically been one of the most powerful things. In most constructed card games, recursion is incredibly powerful. The idea that you can play a card again. And if you compare this to archive memories cost nothing to play. It lets you bring anything back to HQ. This card actually isn't that popular in constructed play. So the question is, why is Deja Vu that popular? And for the most part, it's that events, specifically events, that runners can recur are generally much stronger than any corp events, which is kind of weird. And one of the biggest contributors to this is the Count Syphon, a card which, spoilers, is no longer in the revised core set, which is wild. Now, the thing with the Count Syphon is if you put a couple of these in your deck, you can put 2 of them in your deck, in your Anarch deck, and with a mixture of same old thing, Deja Vus, and even if you want to go all in and play like Levy AR Lab Access, you can play one Count Syphon like, what, 18 times? And that's an issue. Because super powerful cards, a Count Syphon is a nuts card. If you float the tags, this is just 15 credit swing. 15 credit swing! Let alone the corp is losing money, which is super valuable. And with a combination of Deja Vu, same old things, there's so many decks that ran 3 of each of these, and would just spam out super important cards like a Count Syphon over and over again, which is not good. Why is that not good? Negative play experience, but also, it's probably not great for the game where you're just playing the same thing that many times. It's probably not that exciting. You see recursion still exists in the game, but the designers have been a bit more careful about it. This is Rip Deal, which if you want to recur for it, it's more expensive. You have to make a run. You can make better use of it if you access more cards from HQ, but then this card removes itself from the game. Like, recursion has got a lot more nuanced and balanced in this game, which I think is a very good thing that people are learning. If you want more recursion, you have cards like Trope. This is a slow recursion card, a soft recursion card in some ways, but it's very interesting. Another really big thing about losing, there's 2 more things, I guess, about losing Deja Vu, is currents. This has got current. It's Employee Strike. And Employee Strike is a very popular current, or classically it used to be. And the problem with the current war, the idea is a current is in play until the corp scores an agenda or plays a current. And if the corp plays a current, it's like relatively trivial for the runner to either play Deja Vu for a current or same old thing for a current to keep their current near permanently. This pushed corps largely outside of the current game where corps weren't running that many currents. And that was an issue because Employee Strike was very, very strong and very hard to turn off. I think without Deja Vu, it's actually it's a lot harder, a lot slower on tempo to recur currents over and over again, and that pushes the current war more into the favor of the corp, which is good because if you ask me, I think the current game was like totally one-sided. A lot of runners ran 3 same old things, 3 Deja Vus, and currents were on the table forever. I guess one runner who's going to be sad about losing Deja Vu, besides Noise, who's on vacation now, is Max. Having just like a generic recursion card is really good for someone who's going to throw out 2/3 of their deck, but Max just got a lot riskier, which honestly is probably more fun. Yeah, it's a recursion card. It's a standard recursion card and it's out of the game. And that's very interesting. You're now going to have to, if you're playing power cards, you're probably going to play them once. It's probably more exciting for the game. And if you want to recur an event, it's going to cost you 3 clicks with same old thing. And that's at least a bit better for the game, I think. I'm interested to see where recursion goes forward, but so far the new designs have been a lot more interesting than just pay 2 credits, bring something back. You can't trash my programs, they'll come back forever. Another card we lose is Grimoire. Grimoire is out of the revised core set. In fact, every single console from the original core set lost it. It's no longer in the revised core set, which I think is absolutely hilarious. Grimoire it hasn't for a long time been a very popular console, but the numbers on it are actually kind of nuts. 3 credits for 2 MU is insane. I think that's actually the best in the game, besides like Deep Red, which doesn't count and is also rotated. But 3 for 2 MU alone is like, I think the best. I think it's tied with Maya, and I think Mirror is both the same numbers. But generally, big MU makes sense in Shaper, and having it in Anarch was always a bit strange. It didn't line up very well. Now, when you install a virus program, you place 1 virus counter on that program. That's good with viruses. Again, a lot of this stuff doesn't matter so much. Well, It's one of the things also that this card limits the power level of viruses. Every time you design a virus, you have to think, okay, how is it going to work with Grimoire? And whether or not Grimoire was way over the curve or not, that's a different question. But not having this card exist does make virus design easier. Does it make viruses less interesting? Maybe. Do other cards restrict in that way? Sure, yeah. But this card is, it's probably undercosted at least. This is what 2MU consoles look like, by the way. This card's insane. For what it's worth, also, it's very important to understand is that FFG was in a weird situation where they needed to make sure that all the cards in a revised core set were identical to the ones that were either in Genesis or Spin Cycle or the original core set. None of these cards are errated. None of these cards have changed numbers, influence, or text. So if Grimoire, they wanted it still to be in the game, but they thought this had to cost like 4 credits and maybe an extra influence or have a different ability or something like that, they would rather just drop it from the core set and then print something like that in the upcoming cycles. And they've actually gone out of their way to say that the upcoming cycles, specifically Katara cycle, is going to be really important because it's going to be having a lot of cards that will like take place of things that used to exist and fill out certain identities. And I don't mean identities like runners, but I mean identities like concepts that Anarch is responsible of doing. So maybe Grimoire will come back in the near future in a different way. So why was Grimoire good? Parasite doesn't exist. Could instant Parasite things at 1 strength. Imp is in the revised core set, and it would come back stronger. There's a couple of good things to do with it. Data Suckers came back better. Crypsis came back on the table with a counter on it. All the noise stuff was really good. It gave you more MU, and overall, this card actually didn't see a lot of play for a while because all the other consoles that have been printed recently, like Maw and Obelisk and all that fun stuff, were generally better. So we'll see. Maybe a virus console will... I have no doubt a virus console will be reprinted sometime in the future. Let's hope it's something interesting, I suppose. This is Jin. Actually, one of the cool things about the revised core set is they took a lot of cards that were way below the power curve and saw almost no constructed play, and they just dropped them. They just removed them. They said like, hey, no one's playing Jin, so why are we printing Jin? Why are we giving people copies of Jin? And that's kind of cool. I think that's really cool. There's like a 20% of the core set that I think is largely unplayable and constructed. And sure, new cards can come out to change the value of Jin. Maybe there's a one-of virus that you can put in your deck that's like super good, and then Jin gets good. But for the large part, they took out most of the chaff. And that's really cool. It makes the box more valuable or more bang for buck for runners and of corpse too, of course. And that's, I think, pretty good. And I don't have too much to say about Jin. It didn't see that much play. On paper, a card that lets you tutor, give you 3 MU, and lets you pull cards from your deck seems really valuable, but it's largely been a bit too slow. No specific virus has been that game-changing, where spending a click and a credit and installing this has been like that good for it. We've seen a lot of daemons been printed recently, things like Dag Deer, and maybe we'll see a virus daemon coming up. I don't know. But largely, the non-existence of that card has very little impact on the meta. On the opposite side, this card is one of the biggest cards that has been removed from the revised core set, and I think actually has one of the biggest impacts on the game as a whole. This is honestly also one of the cards that I'm most excited to be removed from the game for probably ever, and that's Medium. If you haven't seen Medium, it's a virus program. Hey, Noise, what's up? And it lets you multi-access R&D in a very, very strong way. Not only do you see multiple cards on R&D, but the threat only gets bigger and bigger, and you only see deeper and deeper, which puts the corp in 2 positions. Either purge, waste a whole turn, or spend a whole turn to slow everything down, or make sure you can keep the runner out and then purge. It's an absurd amount of multi-access. For the last 2 years or so, maybe that's a bit more than it should be. For the last while in Netrunner, a lot of runner decks were just medium delivery vehicles, if you ask me, because there's no other card in the game in Netrunner, or there wasn't for a long time, that could close the game like a medium could. If you put a medium down on the table and there's, say, no ice on R&D, or you can break R&D for a very trivial amount of money, you can see the top card and run again, see the second, see the next 2, the next 3, next 4. Every time you trash something or steal an agenda, you'll see 2 more cards. And again, the corp either has to keep you out and then purge, or lose quickly, because eventually you're seeing 8 to 9 cards. And not only is that good because you'll find agendas, but also because the corp is in no way going to be drawing an agenda anytime soon, and they generally need to do that. Just to give you an example, these are a bunch of decks. This came in all these positions at Worlds last year, and it spammed accounts, Syphon, Deja Vu, same old thing like we talked about, but it has 3 mediums. Because if the corp has no money, you throw a medium on the table, you run R&D forever. This is Josh's Canadian Nationals winning post or pre-rotation list. It's medium in Andy. It's once you find that, hopefully you can get into R&D a lot and win. And this goes on and goes on. This is green, an exile deck. A deck that has access to all the interfaces and indexings and test runs, or sorry, Maker's Eyes, and it's still winning with medium because it's so good. And it goes on and it goes on. Here's another shaper with medium. Here's a Count Syphon wizard with medium. And like, it makes a lot of sense. Medium is the card that will see the most and has the strongest threat. And without this, there's not that many cards that can be dropped on the table when the corp's in a bad board state and can close the game. I was frustrated for a long time playing like kind of weird decks that maybe didn't have the best ice because they were doing something different or strange. And if you're playing against somebody who has medium and they just slammed medium on the table, you're in a really bad spot because if you didn't have the good ice to keep them out, you were going to lose very quickly. And now, how deep a runner can see and how quickly they can close the game on their own terms has slowed down a lot. And that's good. In some ways, it lets decks that aren't that resilient maybe have a bit more time to try and get their thing going. And I'm generally positive about it. The one also thing that didn't make any sense about medium is compare this to R&D interface, which costs more. Sure, it doesn't take up MU, but shapers were meant to be the faction that's good at running R&D. And compare it to this card where you put down, and sure, every run sees the top 2 cards, and there's some good, there's some good inevitability in that. Also, it's not unique. Medium isn't unique for what it's worth. This does nothing compared to this. Like the amount of turns you need to win off of an interface versus the amount of turns that you can close the game off with medium is insane. And again, the faction that has indexing is being beat by Anarchs, who for some reason had the best R&D multi-access card. Now, if you do like the medium effects, cards like that still exist in the game. This is Top Hat, which doesn't work generally like people read it. You choose a number from 1 to 5 and access that card. You don't get a look at all 5 first. But the idea is that if R&D is not protected, you can see the top 5 cards slowly and then maybe lock the corp out. A better version is Equivocation, which makes a lot more sense in Shaper. I think this is basically Medium 2.0 or 0.8, or it's a different version of Medium. And the idea with this one feels a lot more fair. This doesn't build virus counters, so it doesn't get scarier and scarier, but if you want to dig on R&D and you can run it 3 or 4 times, you're going to force the corp to draw. And that's cool because it makes the corp generally draw into their economy or to the ice that they need to fix the equivocation problem. And that seems a lot more reasonable than if you have no credits because you were Count Syphon to death, that they put down medium and they can close the game out. And that's interesting. That's really interesting. Also, for what it's worth, Nerve Agent, which was like medium for HQ, but generally it's not as good because medium, if you lock the top of R&D, you lock the game. If you lock HQ, you just generally get some agenda points. This is also out of the game too. So it's a really big deal because now in Anarch, there are almost no multi-access cards. And specifically in the core set, there are no multi-access cards, which means you'll probably be spending influence on them because running and trying to win on single accesses in a just revised core set world is probably not a good way to win the game. This is medium. It doesn't exist anymore. Games might go a bit longer because it's hard. You don't have this option to drop down this power card and close the game when you want. There's other factors in the revised core set world that without Jackson Howard, maybe games go faster or slower, but this just medium not existing, games might actually go a bit slower. And that's cool. This is another really big card that is no longer in the revised core set. This is Parasite. Parasite represents ice destruction. You strap this on a piece of ice, it dies. And it might look like if you read the text that it dies slowly, but it actually can die very quickly. If you pair this up like things like Data Sucker, there's a lot of other cards that are lower strength, but this is generally the easiest one to use. You can instantly parasite a lot of things. Specifically, if you can pull your parasites out maybe at instant speed. Maybe you have some Data Sucker tokens, and then you pull out a self-modifying code into a parasite, and suddenly ice is just blowing up before it has a chance to do anything. And actually, I have mixed opinions about Parasite leaving the game. I think ice destruction probably should exist in the game. Definitely should exist in the game, but I don't think it should be super good. And I think it's generally best if the corp has a time to react to it. But I do think specifically, firstly, that it should exist in the game, and that's because the game was actually balanced around it. To date, the cards in Netrunner were balanced around the core set existing, because the core set was going to exist forever. And here we have a lot of low strength ice that is very, very, very taxing and very, very, very good, but was only considered balanced at a point in time where Parasite existed, where a single Parasite can make short work of a card like Koma Inu. Now there is no Parasite, so suddenly the value in this like post-rotation, post-revised core set world, it got a lot stronger. It got a heck of a lot stronger because there are very few good answers to this card. There are certain cards that deal Komainu really well, but there's a lot of ice like this. Like Yagura is not the big offender because his ice is not incredibly powerful, but like 2 subroutines, Code Gate, 0 strength, like that's actually annoying for 1 credit. But there's other options like Tour Guide, which if you don't deal with assets, can have 20 subroutines. And yes, there's ice that breaks all subroutines for a certain cost, but a lot of decks will really struggle with Tour Guide, and this card was largely balanced either by, of course, trashing the assets, or it just gets parasited really easily. And Kakugo, a card that if you're watching this channel you might know I really don't like, is probably balanced around the concept that it's pretty expensive, but also it dies easily to Parasite. And we don't have Parasite, and that is weird because the value of these cards, and I saw this at Worlds, the value of all these cards, it's like really good. They're existing in a lot of decks because there's very few ways to deal with them elegantly, and runners are splashing influence on that. For what it's worth, and I think we mentioned this before, but the designers specifically mentioned, I'm not sure if it's in this article or it was an article prior, that that these sort of cards, the power cards that were like very big in describing the identity or what certain factions did, like Parasite, Account Syphon, the cards that rotated out, they will be reprinting more reasonable versions that will eventually cycle out inside the whole Katara cycle. And I think that's really exciting. If I'm not mistaken, they specifically said in this article that a new Parasite was going to be coming. And I think that's really good considering that all these problems that we might be having with low strength ice no longer having a good balancing mechanism. And I think it's pretty easy to see how that could happen. If Parasite only checked the beginning of turns, I think it would be pretty reasonable. If Parasite lowered strength, but you couldn't change the strength, it just gained tokens slowly every turn, that'd be cool because Corpse can react to it by purging. It still deals with low strength ice relatively well. Like, there's a lot of ways to balance a Parasite, and I'm excited to see what a future Parasite is. I think just instant Parasiting is really bad. I think without Deja Vu also, Parasite would be a lot more reasonable. A Clone Ship, mind you, is a restricted card now. We will talk about that when we talk about that. But the idea is you couldn't Deja Vu for double Parasite. Maybe Parasite actually isn't super busted right now, but also cards like Syphon don't exist, so yeah. Instant Parasite for days, so that's good. Talking about Parasite, this is another card that's like Parasite that no longer does exist. Wow, let me do that again. That does not exist anymore in the revised core set, and that's Yogg.0. Yogg.0 has text that's unlike anything we've ever seen in Netrunner, which is 0 credits paid ability, and for no credits you can break all the Code Gate subroutines you want, as long as it's 3 strength or less. And the existence of this card, while admittedly it hasn't been that popular for a while, is this existence alone. Like, we talk about it like 2 years ago when this card was very popular, it had a huge impact on the meta, where there's so many Code Gates that were 3 strength or less that just would see no play whatsoever, because the chance of your opponent having a Yogg was reasonably good, and the chance of this ice being worthless was relatively high. Like, this is a card that probably is coming back, is Victor 1.0. People might start playing this, but the problem with Victor 1.0 classically is that it's relatively good. 3 for 3 strength, 2 subroutines. One of the subroutines is annoying. It's a pretty good face check. That card's a pretty good tax for the credits that it costs, but you didn't want to put this in your deck because your opponent played Yogg. You look pretty dumb, and it made cards in your deck absolutely useless. In that ways, Yogg is basically like a permanent Parasite on low strength Code Gates. You install your Yogg on the table, it's like you parasited every single Code Gate in the game. Again, strength included, or excluded. But without this, I think there'll just be a lot more ice that is playable. Even if this says 1 credit, break all Code Gate subroutines, Yogg would be a lot more balanced. But again, they can't change the text on cards. I like this theme a lot of it being the key that just has a bunch of the easiest passwords, the most common passwords. I think that's really cool. It's really on theme. So maybe that'll come back at some point. Also, now the Encrypted Portals deck gets a lot better. Yeah, just to show you how good Yogg was, I don't know if we actually have to do this, but the idea is that Yogg with Data Sucker, you could break through almost all Code Gates. The fact that this was 3 strength or less doesn't really matter too much. You could break 5 strength Code Gates for nothing, and that was an issue. It goofed with the power value. It was just one single card. That was 1 influence, which is also kind of crazy. Goofed with the power level of all Code Gates in the whole game, and it had a big impact on the meta for a card that was, it's super powerful, not very interesting. The also weird thing about this is also one thing that made no sense. So there's the idea of the color pie. Every faction's meant to be good at something and bad at something else. No faction can be good at everything. And it is very obvious when it comes to the different types of ice. Anarchs are meant to be very good at fractors, bad at code gates, and okay at sentries. And all the other factions have their own strengths. And it's very obvious. This is the best fractor that's ever been in the game, and it's an Anarch card. But Anarchs are meant to be really bad at code gates, and yet somehow they got Yogg, and it kind of messed up with the color pie for a while. And I'm glad to see that kind of fixed. Mimic is like kind of still one of the best sentry breakers, but we'll take our battles when we can. Losing Yogg might actually be a big deal for Kit. Kit loved Yogg. There's some cool code gate breakers that got printed recently, but having Yogg, let alone a Dino Yogg, was a big deal for Kit, and we've lost that. So that's kind of a shame. But at least now the code gates are going to be a lot more reasonable. And you can play code gates in your deck and feel good about it. This is Worm. This is rotated out too. We're doing all the cards that are rotated out, by the way, in a row. And this is a very interesting ice, or icebreaker. It's an AI too. It saw almost no play. It's very expensive. It does a really cool thing where it manipulates the strength of ice. You have to boost the strength of this, though, to the ice first before you take the ice strength down, which can be clumsy, that's for sure. But it's kind of chaff. Not a lot of people play it. There was a cool time where this was in like Nasir decks with Parasite, but none of that works anymore. I'm sad that we're missing a dragon. Not a lot of good dragons in Netrunner. This is Wildside. A unique location that says when you're beginning your turn, draw 2, lose a credit. Draw 2 cards, lose a click. Excuse me. And this is actually one of my favorite Netrunner cards of all time. And it's rotating out, which is kind of a shame. I think the theme of this card is absolutely fantastic. The idea that you trade, no matter what, you're out late, but you get good connections, you lose a click, draw 2. And that's like super Anarch to me. Not only the theme, but the idea of the Anarchs, if they want to do something, they can't do it reasonably. There's always like ridiculous conditions attached to it. That's why playing Anarch is really fun. We've seen this come up. This always comes up in Anarch cards. Cards like Frantic Coding, where it's like, okay, you want to install a program, trash 10. Like, they don't do anything in moderation, and I think that's really cool, and Wildside was like the beginning of us seeing that really cool theme. Now, Wildside actually for a long time was a very popular card. It was paired well with Adjusted Chronotype. For a long time in the competitive field, everybody ran 2 Adjusted Chronotypes, 3 Wildsides. Once you set up this 2-card combo, you're getting 2 cards at the beginning of your turn, and that was really good. Funny enough, if you compare that to Ubax, Ubax still doesn't look great, but it's like a mini Wildside, and I don't know. That being said, people were playing Faust, so cards were worth a lot. What's worth, Duggar still exists, so if you want to go crazy and do moderation in Anarch, you can click 4, go dancing, draw 10 cards, and that's really fun. Wildside also means, like, there's no draw cards in the core set Anarch, and there's not a lot of draw cards regardless in the core set. I think it was just Diesel and Wildside, if I'm not mistaken. So, card draw is actually kind of a premium. Not like a lot of people are playing this, but like Anarch card draw is basically 2 cards. And an Earthrise Hotel. So you might have to watch out for that. Oh man, are we at the point? Yeah, we're at the point of cards that got saved. Those are all the cards that got removed. It's like, I don't know, 9 or something. And a lot of the cards that were removed were cards that were kind of busted. They were over the curve, negative play experiences, infinite recursion. And these are cards that were taken from Genesis and Spin and put into the core set. And that's exciting. These cards are saved. And we'll have them forever, probably. Maybe they'll make a new revised core set, a revised core set, but that probably won't be happening for another 5 years. I think that's a safe bet, at least. So this is a Retrieval Run. And Retrieval Run is what I'm talking about an interesting recursion card. It can only recur programs, it installs them for free, which is really good, but you have to make a run on archives. So there's already a bit of counterplay there, or if you expect Retrieval Run, you can ice archives, maybe you can lock them out. It's a fun card. Why is it good? Well, just like we talked about Max, it's really important that Max keeps a card like this. Playing Max without Deja Vu, without Retrieval Run would actually be incredibly difficult, and I love playing Max. So having 2 cards that let you recur your programs, it's harder to recur events. That's pretty great, and it's really important. Within the core set and outside of the core set, Femme Fatale is a super good target. I would actually see maybe splashing copies of Retrieval Run in a core set Criminal just to get your Femme Fatale on the table. She's only 1 influence, but paying 3 credits for a Femme Fatale is absolutely absurd. It's one of the best values in the game. Now, admittedly, a lot of the Anarch breakers modernly do recur themselves from the heap. They can come back whenever you want, so Retrieval Run doesn't look that good with them, but there's other things to do. I've been playing a lot of David. David is no longer on a most wanted list, so getting near infinite Davids by Retrieval Running over and over again has actually been proven to be pretty valuable, and I'm excited for that. There's also a really big barrier breaker we'll get to soon, and you can get that on the table for free. But Retrieval Run is like it's the kind of recursion I like. It's nuanced. There's counterplay to it. It's only recurs a specific thing. Recurring programs is generally not that busted. Again, even recurring a Parasite, if that was in the game, would actually be a pretty good play in a post Deja Vu world. But no Parasite, so we'll see where it places that. This card is Singularity, and it's a card that saw almost no play forever since it came out, besides one specific deck, and I actually think it's probably okay right now. It's a double. It costs 4. That's incredibly expensive. It's half your turn and 4 credits, which cannot be understated how damn expensive that is. But the idea is you run a remote server, and if it's successful, instead of accessing, you trash everything inside that server. You don't trash the ice. A lot of people might goof that up. It's in the server. Ice is in front of the server. It's very important to get that distinction down. Why is that good? Well, if you trash, like, okay, you do the math on that, right? If you trash one thing that costs 5 credits, do you break even? Barely. It took a card slot, so I'd say no. But why is this good? It's because I think in the revised core set, and a lot of the cards that stayed in the revised core set, defensive upgrades are actually pretty prevalent. Ash, 2x3z, but B9CY is in the revised core set, which I'm very excited about. This is one of the cards I think is a pretty fair defensive upgrade in the game of Netrunner. And this exists in the core set. It has some really dope art in the new version. But the idea with this card is even if you lose the Ash Trace, your Singularity will rip up the Agenda, the Ash, and you pay for nothing. And there's actually a lot of defensive upgrades in the new core set. I think Strongbox is still in there. I gotta double check whether this is, I'm correct about this. I'm pretty sure Strongbox, yeah, it's in the core set. So like Strongboxes might be around. You can wipe all of those. There's also some really powerful cards in the modern, like in the newer cycles, like Obokata Protocol. You don't have to steal it if you trash it. That's fine. Ben Musashi, you can trash that. Red Herrings is also, don't have to deal with that. That's in the revised core set. And I think there's actually some value in it. It's a tough card slot for sure, but if you find yourself playing against opponents in a revised core set world or post core set world, and you just don't want to deal with a server that has like 7 upgrades in it, this is actually like a cool card. It's maybe a tough include. It's very expensive, but it actually has a purpose in a revised core set, which I'm pretty happy to see. Also, very worth knowing, the one reason that I played Singularity in decks before is that it doesn't care whether or not you actually access cards, so it works with Eater. If you want to build an Eater deck but also want to still be able to disrupt or get into remotes to steal agendas by throwing them out, this works. So that's cool that that stays together. Next we have Darwin. Darwin was saved. Darwin is an AI breaker, generally a bit below the curve. It's very interesting though. It gets more powerful the more money you pump into it. It breaks ice subroutines for 2 credits a pop, which is pretty bad. It's really expensive, and there's actually some pretty good AIs that have been printed in the last little while. I'm looking at you, God of War. Doesn't work in every deck, but I'm fine with this being around, I guess. It's interesting. It's a panic AI if you need it. You still have Crypsis in the core set, mind you. We've seen Crypsis before, and I'm pretty sure Crypsis is still better than Darwin, but you got your choice there. And if you want to do a whale, so be it. Darwin works interestingly with Hive Mind. If you want to go down that path, that's cool. And also, for what it's worth, Swordsman is still, or is now, in the revised core set. And if you've seen the alt art on Swordsman, the eternal struggle between the Swordsman and the Darwin will continue on forever. So that's really cute. So just like we said before, none of the consoles from the original core set made into a revised core set. So Anarchs got their own console from What Lies Ahead, which is Spinal Modem. For 4 credits, you get 1 MU and 2 recurring credits to use for icebreakers. There is a downside. Whenever there is a successful trace during a run, take a brain damage, suffer a brain damage. And this card's actually relatively cool. I didn't see a lot of play classically. It might have. I didn't play Netrunner when it was just like the first cycle. I came in the 3rd cycle, I believe. So I don't know if this ever saw a lot of constructed play. But if you just look at the numbers, 1 MU, fine. But 2 credits every turn for icebreakers, as long as you're running every turn, that's a lot of money. That's like Blue Moose money. Am I right? Blue Moose, by the way, is banned. It's no longer in the card pool, or competitive card pool. That's pretty great. But that is actually a relatively cool amount of money. 2 credits a turn as long as you're running is good. It's not credits in your card pool, or your credit pool, sorry, so you can't actually use it to place or gamble or install programs. But saving 2 credits a turn if you plan to run every turn should not be dismissed. That is a fair bit of money in a single card. Now this thing here, whenever there's a successful trace during a run, suffer 1 brain damage. This feels to me a bit like Steve Cambridge Scorpios coming out in the same box. The idea that this box also has making news in it. The one faction that's for sure going to be tracing you probably every turn, and makes probably Spinal Modem unplayable in that matchup, which is pretty goofy. But in all the other ones, like all the HB and all the Wayland, even Wayland traces you a bit. In all the HB and Jinteki, go for it. Spinal Modem up. Also, for what it's worth, sometimes taking damage is good. Sometimes losing a trace so you can power up your clan vengeance. Maybe you want to do that. I don't know. Controlling the message gets miserable, but it already was. Reina Roja has a link, so maybe you can build some link up to get your underworld contacts so the Spinal Modem threat isn't that bad. 2 credits a turn, not bad whatsoever. Definitely an interesting console. Is it constructed with quality? I doubt it. You can always play multi-threader for 1 influence, am I right? And people don't play this card that much. Consoles are really good. That's the biggest cost about a console, is that you can only play one of them, right? So the idea is, do you want to play Spinal Modem, you want to play Maw? Maw seems good. I like Maw a lot. This is Force of Nature. It's a really bad breaker. Man, I looked at this. I thought it was actually worse than it was. I thought it was 2 credits for 1 subroutine. It's 2 for 2. But this is what icebreakers, or more particularly, this is what decoders should have looked like in Anarch. And Anarch's meant to be the worst at decoders. It's very expensive. It's 5 credits. It's one of the more expensive icebreakers in the game. It starts 1 strength. That's terrible. And then 1 for 1 strength is fine. But 2 to break 2 code gain subroutines is not bad, but it's inelegant. If you're dealing with 3 subroutines, you're paying 4. 1 subroutine, you're paying 2. Not great. So this is a lot worse than Yogg. Every faction in this revised core set has 1 breaker of each type. That actually wasn't the case in the original core set. I think Criminal was missing a decoder. But yeah, you probably in Shaper want to be splashing for a code gate breaker. This is Gordian Blade in the revised core set. And I honestly thought the numbers would be a lot better, but like I looked up certain ice, like how much it costs to break an Enigma, and it wasn't that much worse to break with Force of Nature. It's still a cost. Look, Force of Nature is it's not a good card. It's not very efficient, but you have an option. There's not much to say about this. They needed a code gate in the core set, so they got one. It's bad. Imp. I'm really happy Imp made it into this game, into the revised core set. Imp is one of my favorite Netrunner cards. You put this down, you get to trash 2 cards when you choose to trash them, when you access them. It's a really cool card. It does a lot of things. It lets you trash operations and ice when they're accessed, something that wasn't possible before all the way to Order and Chaos when Edward Kim came around with his sledgehammer. And that was very valuable. If you don't want to deal with that, you want to just trash like assets, that's also fine too. Maybe trash costs of assets get out of control and you can just drop your Imp and go. Also, Imp is kind of cute in the meta right now with, again, cards that you don't want to steal because the steal or trash costs, or the cost to steal them, are pretty prohibitive. So if you just Imp agendas, sometimes that's actually not bad at all, which is kind of wacky. I'm just glad this card exists. We've seen some upcoming cards from Qatar that pair really well with Imp, and I'm kind of worried about that. But trashing cards, getting accesses, and just trashing things, not getting like good multi-access, but just being disruptive, is really what Anarch looks like it's going to be after the revised core set. So I'm glad it has one of its cornerstone pieces still intact, which is just access things and trash them. Talking about access and trash, we got Hemorrhage, and I'm actually pretty impressed that this card made it. If you're making a lot of successful runs, you get virus counters on there, and you can use them to trash cards from HQ. It's also 4 influence, which is a lot, as much as I have seen Ken Tenma's play this. It's not the easiest thing to do. And this sort of trash card from HQ, we've seen that before. It's a very Anarch thing. And again, this is how Anarchs are shifting, and I'm excited for that. This is Alice Merchant, Run Archives. The Corp has to trash 1 card from HQ. You also get a Hemorrhage token if you play all this together. Very important to know, this is not random. The Corp chooses which card to trash, changes the value of it. There's a lot of ways to play this card. Maybe you want to fight hand size with Itinerant Protester, so that's fun. Maybe it's good with Gang Sign, that's cool. Maybe you just want to run assets and get credits with Aeneas and Foreman. Maybe you just want to trash cards by not trashing things with Maw and then getting Hemorrhage tokens. Maybe you put Maw and Protesters and Alice and Gang Sign and Aeneas and Hemorrhage all together in one deck and it's good. I don't know. But you want to be running often, and this increases the value of your runs. You do have to watch out if you're playing a lot of viruses. Purging gets good, so maybe don't overdo it. But it's a disruptive card. It's kind of expensive, but if you're running a lot, it can get some value if you want to trash cards from HQ. It's a cool card and encourages running. I like that. This is the one that we talked about before. This is Morningstar. Any number of barrier subroutines for 1 credit. It's different than Yogg, subtly different. But more importantly, it costs 8 credits and 2 MU. It's huge. It's one of the bigger if not the biggest icebreaker in the game. I think because we lost Leviathan, it might actually be the most expensive. Oh no, Femme Fatale, never mind. Now the caveat, like a lot of the Anarch breakers, is you can't pump the strength. So you can only deal with barriers of 5 or lower. And if I'm not mistaken, there's only actually one barrier in the revised core set that's above 5 strength. So you're actually going to do pretty well until you deal with Hadrian's Wall. At that point, you can always pump this with things like Data Sucker. There's a lot of other ways to boost ice strength if you want to go in with your like Net Ready Eyes or your Scrubbed. I think it's called Scrubbed. Maybe not. You can get a good barrier breaker. Now, of course, it costs 8. You can retrieval run it for 3. You can frantic coding it for, like, what's 5? It's not great. Or is it 6? It's probably 6. But that's okay. And I think specifically this card's actually pretty exciting in the revised core set because Hive is in the revised core set. Being able to deal with this for 1 credit is pretty sweet. It's actually relatively good. It's also kind of crazy that Morningstar... Oh, I didn't talk about this. Corroder rotated. We missed that. Corroder rotated. Which would be a big deal if people played Corroder, but people classically just play Paperclip instead. It's largely almost, it's in every single barrier, it's either the same or cheaper. Paperclip is than Corroder, which is kind of weird. Corroder is cheaper to install. You can't install it from the heap though, but yeah, this is the new Corroder, which is massively unwieldy. I think it just means more people will play Paperclip, but if you want to put this down, if it makes sense, and sometimes it does make sense. Actually, modernly, a lot of CI decks, Cerebral Imaging decks, are running Ashigaru and having like 15 cards in hand. So, Morningstar attack, am I right? You gotta watch out for ice strength boosting. Sandberg can be an issue, but yeah, Paperclip's still good too. So pick your poison. Maybe you have a Paperclip for most of the game. You run 1 copy Morningstar. If it makes sense, you retrieval run it or get a way to get it on the table. I don't know. It's a really flavorful card, and Anarchs are good at busting walls. What better way to do it than a big old mace? So this is Liberated Counts. It's in the new core set, the revised core set, and it's actually a really big deal. I was super surprised to realize that in the original core set, Anarch had no econ cards. There was not a single economy card in the Anarch core set, if I'm not mistaken, the original core set, besides Cyber Feeder, which gives you 1 recurring credit per turn to like install viruses or use programs, which is barely economy. That's kind of crazy. That's super crazy. And you could see that. It actually held Anarch back a lot in the original core set. And for a long time, the beginning of Netrunner, you'd have to splash either, like every other faction had really good economy options. Shaper had Magnum Opus, probably the best in the core set meta. And Criminal had Bank Job and Account Syphon, which is a lot of credits, a lot of money. And then Anarchs had, what's the Armitage code busting. But now they have Liberated. This card's been seeing a lot of competitive play for a long time now. Like I remember like 1 year, just people started playing it. They were like, it's fine. It's 12 credits in a card, 12 credits in 5 clicks. It's also a click for 4, which is a pretty big click. So you can leave one of these on the table with 4 credits on it and only take it when you need it. That's pretty good. Sure gamble at will. Career Fair this out. It gets really good. You get 15 credits on a card. No, that can't be right. 16 minus 3, 13 credits. My 12 is wrong. My 12 was very long. It's 10 credits for 5 clicks, so it's still good. But yeah, it's now going to be around forever, and that's really good because it means Anarch will always have economy, and they don't depend on rotation to have just a basis of economy, and that's really strong. This is Scrubber. This card, I'm really happy that it didn't rotate, and I was actually really worried because this card was meant to rotate, and then surprise, it's in the revised core set. 2 credits to trash cards, that's a really big deal because any deck that has a lot of assets, you get 2 credits from this every turn. It's not unique, you can put 2 of these down, you can get 4 free credits a turn. And if your entire game plan is to trash all the stuff they install, 4 free credits, 2 free credits a turn is really, 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 really valuable. So this is what decks used to look like. There's still some very good asset spam decks. This is Josh Wilson's Canadian National winning Moons deck. It's an Estelle Moon deck. Won Canadian Nationals a couple months ago. It has 23 assets and it runs Friends in High Places to bring them all back. I'm not going to go too deep into this deck, but the idea is that being able to trash this stuff and saving 2 4 credits a turn, 2 credits, 4 credits a turn is a really big deal. One of the best abilities in competitive Netrunner for the last year or so is Wizard. Just because without playing a card, having 3 credits to trash things a turn is an insane amount of money. And there was actually a large amount of decks that had like 20 plus assets in them. And when we were losing Wizard, I was very scared that asset spam would get very strong. But all at the same time that Wizard rotated, Friends in High Places is no longer a legal card. And we kept Scrubber. Still think Wizard's obviously way better than Scrubber, but having this like one influence way to deal and kind of tech your deck against asset spam is relatively a good thing that exists in the game. And so far, asset spam hasn't been that big of a problem. At Worlds, everyone's trying to deal with cerebral imaging anyway, so maybe it's still good. I don't know, but it's glad that we have an option here. It's a release valve somewhere. And these are, wow, we're at the back stretch. It's been what, an hour so far? Christ. These are the cards that remain in the core set. We'll go through them really fast. A lot of them should be no surprise, I think. This is Demolition Run. This card actually makes very little sense to me. Make a run on HQ and RD, you may trash at no cost any cards you access. And this card used to be cool because you used to have Medium and Nerve Agent, right? You used to have Medium and Nerve Agent. And the idea is if you had a lot of Medium tokens, you could run R&D, trash 4 cards. If you had 4 tokens, run again, and then you'd see 5 fresh cards because you just trashed 4. Now the thing is, Medium and Nerve Agent no longer exist, and if you've noticed, this card takes a click to fire. So if you want to, you can't play this with multi-access cards like Maker's Eye. You can't play with Anarch multi-access like Sovereignius Stim Implants because it takes a click. So the best you can do with this, I think the only 2 cards that this card works with is like HQ Interface, which mind you is in the revised core set. You can run HQ, trash a bunch of it, or maybe the Turning Wheel, and you can actually get your like Demolition Run. But on its own, if you're playing this for a single axis, like you're running R&D, trashing 1 card, it's probably almost inherently worse than Imp. When you put Imp on the table, you get 2 counters, so you get 2 trashes, and you can choose what you trash. So if you run HQ and you see a card you don't want to trash, you don't have to, and you can run again, as opposed to Demolition Run, which you trash whatever you access. It's a run event, it's less influence, maybe that's good for Ken, I don't know, but overall, if you're, maybe Ken with HQ Interface and Demo Run will be fun, but this card just got a lot harder to play. It also, you can't run a remote with it, and then if you could, it would be just like a better singularity, but this card got a lot harder to play without a lot of like, without like hardware or programs that don't take a click to use to make multi-access. I guess also you could probably play as an Atom with, what's that one called? No, he has a directive that lets you access 2 cards from HQ, so you get a bit more value. But yeah. Stimhack made it. It's still in the game, and this is one of the most iconic Netrunner cards. Punch yourself really hard in the head, get 9 credits, and make a run in the reverse order. And this card's huge. 9 credits out of nowhere and a run is insane for 0 credits. It wins games. It's hard to play around. You got one of these in the bin. Same old thing is always going to be a problem. It always means super run. This card got a bit worse with cards like Personal Workshop rotating out of the game. I thought this was a contender for being in the revised core set. I understand why it isn't. There's a lot of words on there too. But even in Shaper, it's really good. The idea that you can stim hack with a self-modifying code, install a program, break things, do it all for free is really good. Even in Anarchs, we have heap breakers, so you can stim hack to install your Black Orchestra, break with it. It's pretty expensive. You also have Street Peddler in Anarch. Maybe you install your console for really cheap, and you also have Clone Chip, which is pretty good. There's a lot of ways to get value out of Stim Hack. Even just having 9 credits, maybe for trashing assets, for just charging a remote out of nowhere is very valuable. Again, brain damage, it's not actually the worst thing against most matchups. It really isn't. Against ones that are trying to kill you, maybe specifically, losing a card randomly is bad, but like brain damage honestly isn't that bad of a thing. You can easily win a game with 3 brain damage. Right? Just don't play a combo deck that needs to hold 5 cards in hand. Really solid. Also, what it's worth, I didn't mention this before. This is a weird time to mention it, but this is the amount of numbers of each card that are in the revised core set, and you notice a lot of these are 1s. A lot more than it used to be in Netrunner. This is the old one. There's like, what, like 2 cards that are 1-ofs? One of them is noise, so it doesn't count. And now there's a lot more 1-ofs. There are more unique cards, and I think that's actually really cool. So they kind of went for breadth instead of depth. And I think that's actually good. I think it gives, like, Netrunner FFG can only print so many cards to put in a box at a certain price point, like on pieces of cardboard. And so they want for a wider variety of cards instead of more of the same. And sure, if that means if you need to be competitive and you want to have 3s of all of these, you might have to buy 2 or 3 core sets. I think that's okay. It's a bit unfortunate, of course. You'd rather want more for your money. I can understand that. But I think it's largely better that there's more cards. This is kind of backwards that I'm saying there's more cards in the card pool, but it's in one product, so that's fine. But also, like, the revised core set meta, I imagine, is balanced around itself. The fact that you have 1 stim hack makes it more exciting when you play. The fact that you have 1 singularity makes sense. It's not like a really good card. And 1 hemorrhage and White Knives Carver and Xanadu, which are unique. Like that's pretty cool. I think it's better that when a new player who wants to try the game has more things to play with, and if they're serious, they want to buy a 2nd core set. For what it's worth, I think you actually get by with 2 core sets in this. There's no like super powerful cards that I think you need 3 of. It's not like Desperado or, you know, Sansan. Those are all gone. So whatever. Stim Hack is a 1-of. So it'll be surprising when it comes up. You might actually want 2 of those. That card's really good. Cyberfeeder made it. It's 1 recurring credit a turn. 1 recurring credit a turn is not bad. It's not credits in your card pool, but if you fire that every turn, it's good value. It's underworld context value, and that's actually pretty good value. It's 1 influence. I guess you could splash it if you have more of the card pool. I'd actually be, and you had the MU, I'd be more interested in splashing multi-threader. For 1 influence, you get more credits per turn, which is more expensive, but generally better. But you could play a deck that has a lot of recurring credits. Maybe that's something that's necessary if you're playing somebody like Nasir Maidan, where you don't have money. That's kind of cool, but it's Cyberfeeder. It's as exciting as it looks, and it looks okay, I guess. This card's huge. Data Sucker is huge. This is a card that a lot of people might be surprised is still in the game, and I think this card is on the edge of being in the game because it's kind of busted. Inherently, it's busted, and that's because the numbers on it are so damn low. It's 1 to install, 1 MU, 1 influence. So this card can be played anywhere at any point in time for almost no influence. And why is this card so good? If you run a central server, you get a virus counter. What does a virus counter mean? -1 strength. What does -1 strength mean a lot of times? It means you save a credit. In the average case, it means you save 1 credit to boost. Sometimes it means more, because some icebreakers are worse at boosting. And in the best case, it means sometimes your breakers can now deal with things like Mimic, which can't boost its strength, can break 4 strength subroutines. And the point is, every time you run a central server and they don't purge, it's like you have a Desperado on the table that's non-unique and you paid 1 credit for. You run archives and now you're getting a Data Sucker token and maybe you're drawing cards from other things, but it's every time you get a Data Sucker token, imagine it like getting a credit. Just because next turn when you run with the Gordian Blade, you save your credit. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, and I think Data Sucker largely needs to exist because this same pack comes with so many other fixed strength breakers, like Mimic and also Morningstar. Like, I think that's really important that Morningstar can possibly break what's it called? Hadrian's Wall. I think that's valuable, but this is probably a card that's on the edge. I would assume the designers were arguing about whether or not this should exist because it's a cool card. It just probably needs to cost a bit more and cost more than 1 influence, but it's definitely very solid. It's probably a bit too good. Haven't seen a lot of it been played recently, though. I think people are going faster on different things. But like the value in this card is insane. It's been around forever. It's highly splashed in just about everything. It's a good 1 influence card if you're running. And I'm glad that the cards in this game encourage running. Mimic. This has come up a couple times, but it's oh wait, well, we're not meant to talk about Mimic yet. Data Sucker works well with other things like Maven. Works well with Parasite, or it used to. This is Mimic again. Mimic is a killer. It's fixed strength, but it deals 1 per subroutine, and it's 1 influence, and it's cheap to install, and that's really good. It's a really good killer. It used to be the standard killer in basically every faction for a long time. You'd run this alongside Data Suckers, so as long as you had 1 or 2 Data Suckers, you weren't scared of high strength sentries. High strength sentries, there are more of them in the game, and they got a bit more impressive and hard to deal with. So relying on Mimic is kind of not the easiest thing. Despite how good all the numbers on this, most Anarchs are actually relatively playing MK Ultra more commonly. And MK Ultra is installable from the heap, so you don't have to worry about trashing, but it's more expensive to break things. So there are definitely some trade-offs with it. But I think it's generally easier to use. That being said, Mimic is not bad whatsoever. Getting this down on the table with some modicum of Data Suckers, maybe you also want to play Null to make sure your breakers are really good. Also works really well with Morningstar, and you're probably in a good spot. Nah, this card probably should be more than 1 influence. It's really good. Inject is probably a reason why you want to play MK Ultra over Mimic, and also Nanotech came out recently, which is like better Mimic for 1 influence, and yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Watch out for Archer. I pulled up these tabs. I don't remember why. Archer's going to be a problem with Mimic. You got to play around some of the cards. You might want a way to deal with high strength things in a pinch if you need to. But low strength things, if you're breaking this for 2 credits, it's probably still fine. Well, that's what I wanted to say. Mimic is like very similar looking to Yogg, right? But it's different because it costs 1 per subroutine as opposed to 0. So even if you run low strength sentries and someone has a Mimic, this is still fine that you pay 3 credits and they pay 2 every time. Like, that's not bad whatsoever. As opposed to if this said 0 credits, break all of them. And I'm glad it doesn't. Ice Carver. This is a unique card. It's still in the core set. Lowers all strength by 1. That's good for all the reasons that we saw before. It would make things like Yogg even more nuts, but it's good with your Mimic and your Morningstar. And even outside of that, if you're running fixed strength breakers, it can save you multiple credits a turn. It's fine. It's cool. It's kind of difficult running unique resources because you don't know how many to run because the second one is largely useless. Is it that important? So it's sometimes like 46th card syndrome. But I'm glad it's still there, I guess. And last card is Xanadu, which we talked about before. Res cost of all ice increased by 1. Really good with Reina Roja. If you want to be really obnoxious, throw in some network exchange, I guess, for 2 influence, I don't know. And then just increase the res costs by a lot and you're good to go. And that's it. That is revised core set for Anarch, and it's very interesting. Not a lot of duds in there, a lot of very interesting things, but I think overall the biggest thing that we have to understand is that we went from a faction that had the best multi-axis for some reason to a faction that has none. And all these cards, and there's a lot of cards outside of the core set I think are very, very, very big when it comes to identifying what Anarchs do, and I think the 2 biggest ones are probably Maw, that's the biggest one, and maybe second biggest might just be Bagat. Might become Bagat, maybe not entirely. But the idea with this is that now your axes are still single axes, but they're very damaging. And the idea that when you run HQ, you trash a card with Maw, you hit the thing with Bagat, you get a hemorrhage token, maybe you trash the thing with Imp. Like, I guess you can't Imp and Bagat at the same time, or Imp and Maw at the same time, but the idea is that your runs get good. There's also a lot of recurring credits in Anarch, whether that's an Anarch thing and they can run with low credits and recurring credits, I don't know. But all in all, I'm kind of excited. I think Anarch in the core sets actually, unless you're splashing multi-axis, is going to have a relatively hard time closing the game. Like, you're pretty good, I guess, if you import yourself some I get Femme Fatales is really good with retrieval runs. You get those for free. You might want some card draw because you have none of it, so you might want some diesels in there. You might want to go in for a bit more economy. I don't know what's a cheap influence econ option. Maybe just easy merc is good enough. Emergency shutdown, forge activation orders, also very good with Reina Roja. Those are, we'll get to those when we do the criminal stuff, but it's very interesting. And I'm excited to see what Anarch shapes out to be. I was playing Anarch Our Worlds. I was playing just Valencia Estevez with Magnum Opus, and it was fun. I played Bagat and Maw, and you're running central servers for cheap with bad publicity and just trashing things, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm kind of excited for that it's much different than just drop medium, trash all the ice, and run R&D for the rest of the game. And that's cool. Alright, if you have any ideas of revised core set runner Anarch stuff, let me know in the comments. If I missed anything, please let me know in the comments. I appreciate you watching. I know these things are very long. We got 6 more of these to do for every other faction on the corp and the runner side. We're not going to be doing them all this week. I'm going to try and space them out so we get some JNet games in between so things don't get too dry. And I'm excited to try this stuff out. Maybe we'll actually get some videos that are just revised core set only. Yeah, we'll probably end up doing that. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned. We got more stuff coming on the channel. Also, we're live streaming Thursday, 8:45 Eastern on Twitch. There's a link in the description. That's all. Ciao.